Alright, hi guys, welcome back to the Mina Does Art Stuff YouTube channel. My name is Mina and on this channel we do art stuff. So I have two sets of dot cards from Schmincke from their Horadam Artist quality range. I have the 140 colour dot card, which is their regular range of colours, and then I also have the 40 dot card for their super granulating colours. Now this doesn't include the haze set or the most recently released urban set. I do have the urban colours and I have swatched those in a previous haul video. When I come to do this video, because I'm going to do this one as a separate video from the 140 because I feel like that's going to be long enough on its own. I will also do the urban set as well at the same time so you can see those as well. I don't have the haze set so I can't swatch those out for you, but in any case, that's going to be the next video in this little two-part series. I'm not sure when the second one's going to come out, if it'll be the week after this one or if I'll put up a different video in between. We'll just have to see. So I think I'm going to do this video in two parts. I'm going to do one version which is just going to be real-time, me talking and chatting through the process. Mostly just reading out the colour names and talking about which ones I like and what and all those sorts of things. They don't have the pigment information included on the actual leaflet, so I won't be reading those out, but if you are interested, it's really easy to find that information online. Sorry if you can hear the train going by. I've got the window open because it's quite warm in here, and notice we're losing the lights. I'm going to turn a light on, and then and then I'll also put up a version that is essentially like a time-lapse version of this video without the talking, set to music for anyone who is not interested in listening to me waffle while I swatch colours and just wants to see the swatching. Yeah, also the Schmincke dot cards come with this lovely sort of like quite fairly thick plastic insert, which could be quite useful as like a palette if you needed it for something. So don't throw that away if you get one. Okay, so I'm going to zoom you guys in a little bit and hopefully remember to move the camera as needed or move the paper as needed, and then let's get to it. Okay, so let's see, what brush am I going to use today? I think let's go with this Escoda Ultimo size 6 in the travel brush variety. Let's pull out a different brush today, just mix things up a little bit. Our first colour here is titanium white. It says titanium opaque white, so I'm actually going to go over the writing as well just to help with opacity. I think this brush might have been a bit dirty. It's tinted pink. Okay, so apologies, that first colour's not going to be the most accurate. Then we have permanent Chinese white, which they class as being semi-transparent. Then we have titanium yellow, which I think is like PY53, like nickel titanate yellow. This one is semi-opaque. Quite a light colour. Yeah, here we go. Then we have lemon yellow. I haven't pre-wet any of these dots, just want to see how well they reactivate from dry. This is classed as being semi-transparent, semi-staining. Then we have cadmium yellow lemon. This one is marked as being semi-opaque. Interesting to see what these look like when they're dry. Then we have a chromium yellow hue lemon. I'm not usually a fan of lemon yellows. That's probably why I haven't said much yet about the colours, is because these aren't typically the sort of shades I go for. I definitely prefer my yellows on the warmer side, or like, I guess, mid yellow to warmer yellows is my preference. It's funny, I prefer warmer yellows, but I like cooler blues and reds. Okay, so that's Chromium Yellow Hue Lemon. Then we have Vanadium Yellow. This one is classed as opaque. I don't know, I wouldn't say this is any more opaque than the one they marked as semi-opaque, so I guess we'll see when it dries. Again, it's a little bit more on that lemonier side of things. Cadmium Yellow Light. I do like this shade, and sometimes I don't mind having a cad yellow on my palette. I don't very often. The only times, I think the only cadmium yellows I have on my palette, I think I have one in my Winsor & Newton palette, and that's just because it came with that palette. And although having said that, sometimes it is quite nice having a slightly opaque yellow, especially for like the centre of flowers and stuff, if you need it to show up on top of another colour. Then we have Pure Yellow. This is one of the yellows I do have from Schmincke, and I do really enjoy this shade. It's a nice sort of mid-yellow. I believe this is their PY154 shade, if I'm remembering the colour number correctly. Wasn't a lot on that dot, so that's not the best representation of that colour, I will be honest. That's really not showing it to its full potential. Then we have Aurelian Hue. So if you didn't know, the original Aurelian pigment tends to go like a brown colour when exposed to the sun. Quite quickly as well. It's not like something that happens a few years down the line. I think it happens pretty quick. So a lot of brands have opted for a hue alternative to the original Aurelian, or it's sometimes called chrome yellow, or no, so cobalt yellow. It's the PY40 pigment that you want to be aware of. Then we have Cadmium Yellow Medium. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the territory of like the warmer yellows that I enjoy. This one is also marked as being semi-opaque. We have Chromium Yellow Hue Light. So the one above it was Chromium Yellow Hue Lemon. This is just Chromium Yellow Hue Light. Try and get that activated a bit more. There we go. Then moving on to Transparent Yellow. This is Schmincke's version of PY150. So this is their Nickel Azo Yellow. They call it Transparent Yellow. It is a very transparent pigment. Highlight fastness. And it does have a really nice sort of range of colour. Like in mass tone it can be quite dark, but it can wash out to a really nice bright yellow. I find it's a really good all-round mixer as well. Then we have Turner's Yellow, which is semi-opaque. It's a nice sort of soft Naples yellow type of colour. Then we have the Quinacridone Gold Hue, which if you saw my Quinacridone Gold comparison video, I'll try and remember to link that below, you'll have seen how this one stacks up to a range of other Quinacridone Gold pigments, or paints rather I should say, in my collection. Then we have Chromium Yellow Hue Deep. I might change my brush. This brush is quite soft and I need to sort of scrub at the paints a little bit to activate them. Not massively, but Chromium Yellow Hue Deep. I think I will change brushes. This is a Da Vinci Colineo size 8. There we go, it's a size 8. It's a fairly new line to the Da Vinci range. So next up we have Cadmium Yellow Deep. This is marked as being completely opaque. Then we have Indian Yellow. This one is marked. This one is completely transparent, according to the label. We will see. Seems okay so far. It's definitely verging more on the orange side of things. Then we have Yellow Orange. This one's transparent. Then we have Cadmium Orange Light. Now this is a shade I do not like. I'm not a fan of these super bright, slightly unnatural oranges. I'm very much, I enjoy the more golden and earthy orange colours. Like quinacridone gold is like my version of orange that I enjoy, or like a dark yellow. Next up we have Chromium Orange Hue, and again there wasn't a massive amount on that dot, so I don't think that's the best representation of colour. We have Cadmium Orange Deep, Opaque. Ugh, not a colour I like very much at all. I rarely have a pre-mixed orange on my palette unless it's a quinacridone gold, because it's so easy to mix a nice orange. Then we have Schmincke's Transparent Orange, which, if I'm not mistaken, is like a pyrrole orange. Can't remember the pigment number. I think it's like PO71 maybe. I might be. I'm probably wrong. Like I said, I'm not a fan of orange, so I don't know the pigments that well. Don't take my word for it. And then at the end here we have Satin Red. Okay, it's a slightly more red leaning orange, but still, I mean, I prefer the transparent orange to this one. But even the transparent orange isn't my favourite. Then we have Cadmium Red Orange. This one is opaque. And then Permanent Orange. Feels like there's a lot of oranges in this range. Maybe that's just because I don't like orange and so I feel like there's too many. So Permanent Red Orange, this one. Sorry, ended up touching the other swatch, so might be a little bit of bleed through. But they are very similar colours, so there's not that much of a difference between them in the first place. Then we have Permanent Red, moving into the red zone. Then we have Cadmium Red Light. Again, I don't typically go for these more orangey reds. I definitely prefer the cooler, pinker leaning reds on my palettes. I find they're more flexible for mixing. Then we have Geranium Red. This one's semi-transparent. It's a nice sort of, almost like a fire engine red type of colour. I actually don't mind that one. That one's not bad. If I was going to have a warm red, that wouldn't be the worst one to have. Then we have Vermilion. It's funny, I've always wanted to like vermilion, but I never do. I never enjoy this colour that much, and whenever I have had it on a palette, it's always just sat there unused, or unless I force myself to use it, and then I just don't really like it. It's just a bit heavy. It's a bit of a heavy colour because it's usually quite opaque. Then we have Vermilion Light. This might be better because it's meant to be a transparent version of vermilion, I guess. That's fairly light already. That's nice. But still not quite a favourite. I don't know. It reminds me a bit of Quinacridone Coral actually, or Quin Red sort of shade. It's not actually that bad. That'd probably be a really nice mixer for like more corally tones. Then we have Scarlet Red, and I believe I have this one as well. This is about as warm a red as I usually go, which by comparison to the Vermilion Light is fairly pinkish. Then we have Cadmium Red Middle. Then we have Quinacridone Red Light. It's really nice. And we have Transparent Red Deep. I do like this one. It's a really beautiful colour. Then we have Cadmium Red Deep. It's a nice dark rich red, fairly opaque. And we have Perylene Maroon. Make sure I keep it on camera. This is a nice sort of like blood red type of colour, nice and dark. Perylene colours are beautiful. Unfortunately, a lot of them tend to have quite a drying shift. So whilst the colours are beautiful when wet, they can be a bit on the dull side once they've dried. Having said that, I do still really like them. Then we have Perylene Dark Red. Followed by Alizarin Crimson. If I'm not mistaken, this is, yeah, based on the light fastness rating shown on here, this is the original Fugitive Alizarin Crimson. So that would be PR 83. Then we have Ruby Red Deep, which I really like this colour. If I'm not mistaken, this is PR 264, which is a colour I really enjoy. I really like this pigment. It's a bit heavy, but I like the richness. And sorry, camera cut off. I was saying I really like the Ruby Red Deep. It's a bit of a heavier colour. It's a bit it's a bit more opaque, but it washes out to a really beautiful sort of pinky red colour, and I just love it. Then we have Madder Lake Deep, which I would also really enjoy, but it still has that, if I remember correctly from when I looked at the information on this one, and it's got a low light fastness, which tells me this has that original Alizarin Crimson in the mixture, or some other fairly fugitive red pigment in the mix. Then we have Madder Red Dark. Then next up we have Bordeaux. Well, that's nice. That's a nice colour. It's not one I've tried before. I wonder what the pigment is, because it's got a slightly lower light fastness rating than some of the other reds. At 3 stars out of 5. Then we have Rose Madder. Again, this has a lower light fastness rating and it's fairly weak. It's not a massive dot either, but even so, that's a fairly weak pigment, it seems. Again, I'm not sure what the pigment information is for that one. Then we have Permanent Carmine, which I do know this one is PV19. It comes in a number of their basic palettes, or basic colour selections. And then Ruby Red, which is their version of, it's also PV19, but this is Schmincke's equivalent to a quinacridone rose, and I really like it as well. I like the Permanent Carmine, but this one is a bit more red, a bit more pink than the Permanent Carmine. I'm not sure how well you can see that right now because it's still wet. Then we have Magenta, which I think this is like the original magenta pigment, so PV42 rather than PR122, which is quinacridone magenta, or PR202 is the other version used for quinacridone magenta sometimes. I much prefer the PR122. It's a much brighter pigment. Then we have Purple Magenta, which isn't too bad, it's nice and bright. There we go. So that Purple Magenta looks like a PR122, and this is their quinacridone magenta, which is just, again, just feels a bit more dull. It's not as bright as I'm used to for a quinacridone magenta when it's PR122. I actually feel the same way about the Daniel Smith quinacridone magenta. Theirs is also PR202. PR122 or 122 from Daniel Smith is their quinacridone lilac, and I much prefer that shade. Then we have quinacridone violet. So a little bit of that Rose Madder bleeding in, but I don't think it's going to affect the colour too badly. Then we have Potter's Pink. Schmincke's Potter's Pink. Oh, that is not Potter's Pink. I think that's been mislabeled, or they've put the wrong dots on there. But that is not Potter's Pink. That looks like one of the magentas. That's not a Potter's Pink. So ignore that one. We've got a dud colour here. Then we have Perylene Violet. Again, another really beautiful colour. Beautiful perylene colour, nice and moody and deep. We have quinacridone purple. It's not my favourite. I know lots of people like this as a mixer, which I can see why, but I just not a huge fan. It's not my kind of colour. I love purples, but not this one. Then we have Manganese Violet, good old PV16. It's It's nice. This is a nicely granulating pigment. It's also included in a lot of Schmincke's super granulation colours as well. It's a little bit harder to re-wet, but that's true of any brand, to be honest. And it's a nicely granulating pigment. Okay, and then we have Schmincke Violet. Okay, so my camera battery died, so I had to change that quickly. I was just saying that the Schmincke Violet is their version of a dioxazine. Then we have Cobalt Violet Hue. Again, this is one that's included in a lot of their super granulation mixes, or at least in a few of them. Maybe not a lot, but it's definitely in a few. This, I believe the pigment is PB62, 60 something. It's an odd one. It's not one that's offered by many brands, and it's also not the typical cobalt violet sort of colour. It's typically more of a pinky hue. Then we have Ultramarine Violet, which is, I believe that's PB15, but I can't remember if Schmincke's one is a mix or a single pigment. And they say it's a granulating one, so we shall see. Then we have Delft Blue, which is Schmincke's Indanthrone Blue, or Indanthrone Blue. It's PB60. It is one of my favourite shades of like a dark warm blue, but I'm not sure Schmincke's one is my favourite version of this colour. It's really beautiful when it's wet, but when it dries down it can be quite dull. Then we have Schmincke's Indigo. Now their indigo is interesting because they actually use the original indigo pigment as part of their mix, so it doesn't include a black pigment in here. I think PB66 is the code for like the original fugitive indigo pigment, which is why this doesn't have a high light fastness rating, but it is a beautiful blue. Then we have Dark Blue. Not sure what the pigment is for that one. Then we have Phthalo Sapphire Blue, which is the Phthalo Blue Red shade. So that's PB15:6, if I remember correctly. Although it doesn't seem like a particularly red version of this colour. I've definitely seen more red leaning versions. And then we've got Cobalt Blue Deep. That one's not re-wetting particularly well. But it does look like a nicely granulating blue. Then we have French Ultramarine, which is their more granulating version of Ultramarine. I mean, French Ultramarine typically is more granulating and more red leaning than regular Ultramarine. Although I'm not sure I would really notice the difference too massively. And then we have Ultramarine Finest, which is their more finely milled ultramarine, and this one has less granulation, or actually they don't even mark it as being granulating, so I'm not sure how granulating this one is, but you can see it's not as red leaning as the French Ultramarine. It's definitely it's definitely more green leaning. I'm not sure how well that's showing up on camera, but in real life, in person, you can definitely see that the Ultramarine Finest is definitely more green leaning than the French Ultramarine. Then we just have plain old ultramarine blue. I'm not sure why they felt the need to have 3 versions of ultramarine, but there we go. Then we have cobalt blue light. And then down here we have cobalt blue hue. And we have mountain blue. This one's a bit weaker. I mean, it's a bit harder to re-wet. Then we have cobalt azure, which I do like this pigment. If I remember correctly, it's a cobalt pigment, like a, I mean, it says cobalt azure. I think this is PB36. I think. I might be wrong. It might be PB35. It's definitely one of those like cerulean type pigments. Then we have Prussian blue. I do like Schmincke's Prussian blue, but I find you have to let it, you have to pre-wet it a little bit. When I first use it, if the pan is dry, like all the paint is dry, usually the first sort of swipe of that colour isn't going to be super saturated, but you go back and you scrub the pan a little bit and then you get a nice deep, rich blue coming up from it. Then we have Paris blue. Definitely have some interesting colour names for some of their colours that I don't recognise, like Paris blue or mountain blue. I'm not sure what the pigment is for this one, but again, it's not activating super well. So I wonder if there's something like a cobalt in there or something, I'm not sure. Then we just have plain old phthalo blue. I'm not sure which version this is supposed to be, blue or green. It just says phthalo blue. Sorry, red or green leaning. Okay, moving on to the second page. Still in the blues, we now have cerulean blue hue. So this is definitely more of a phthalo. Might be mixed with some white, I'm not entirely sure. Then we have Helio Cerulean, which is PB16, so it's a phthalo. This does re-wet really nicely from a pan if you dry it down from a tube. For some reason it's not re-wetting particularly well here. But it's a really nice mixer, it's a really nice sort of phthalo turquoise colour. Then we have Cobalt Cerulean. That one reactivated really nicely. And then we have Helio Turquoise, which I think this is the mix version. So this is PB15 and PG7, I believe. Oh, sorry, about to go off the top of the screen there. And then we go to Cobalt Turquoise. I do like their cobalt turquoise. I believe their version is PB50. Sorry, PG50. It's fairly opaque, and it's also a beautiful granulating colour. Then we've got cobalt green turquoise, which is a lot like the cobalt turquoise, just a bit darker, a bit more green leaning, as the name would suggest. There we go. Then we have Prussian green, which is definitely more blue leaning than other Prussian greens I've seen. Then we have Viridian, which is PG18 and notoriously hard to re-wet. As a pigment in general, Viridian is not an easy one for re-wetting. Then we have Chromium Oxide Green Brilliant. I can't remember what mix these pigments are, but it's not like any chromium oxide green I've seen. I've never seen a transparent chromium oxide green before. It's usually very opaque, and this looks a lot like it's got a phthalo green in there somewhere. So next up we have phthalo green, which is PG7. So this is phthalo green blue shade. I'm sorry, the paper's wonky. And then we have Helio Green, and this is another phthalo. This is phthalo green yellow shade. Let me touch that cobalt turquoise swatch. Then we have Permanent Green Olive. Schmincke tend to include this in a lot of their basic palettes. It's part of their like basic 12 colour lineup if you buy one of their sort of like beginner kits or beginner sets. It's not a bad one, but it's not what I would call particularly olive. They do have another olive that I prefer. Then we have Sap Green. I usually love Sap Green, but I'm really not a fan of the Schmincke version. It's just far too bright and garish. I'm sorry, that train is never ending. Then we have Permanent Green. As much as I love greens in watercolours, I'm not a fan of these very neon, garish, unnatural looking greens. Having said that, I don't mind this May green. It's kind of like a leaf green type of colour. It is a little bit garish, it is a little bit unnatural looking, but it's very much that shade of green of it's a sort of colour you would see on leaves in a tree when the sun is shining on it. Like it's that really bright green sort of colour. Plus I also like it as a mixer, even though it's a mix itself. I believe it's a mix of lemon yellow and phthalo green or something like that. But it's definitely a good mixer for adjusting your other greens if you need to. So then we have Cobalt Green Pure. Followed by Cobalt Green Dark. I never used to be a huge fan of this colour, but now I actually really love it. I really love the dark sort of bluish green, and it's got the most amazing granulation. Then we have Hooker's Green. Again, this doesn't look like any Hooker's Green I've really ever seen before. I'm not a huge fan of Hooker's Green anyway. It's not a colour I keep on my palette. I don't even think I have a tube of it in my stash or a pan of it anywhere. But from what I've seen, that's not really what I recognise as a Hooker's Green. Then we have Olive Green. And this one doesn't have a highlight fastness. I don't know what the pigment combination is for this one, which would explain why the first olive green was called permanent green olive, and this one is just olive green. Then we have chromium oxide green, and this is more sort of pigment I was expecting. Opaque, a bit muted, and beautiful nonetheless. Then we have olive green yellowish, and this is my favourite version of olive green that Schmincke do. I mean, they have 3 versions. This is the one I like. It's not my favourite version of olive green ever. My favourite one is actually by Sennelier. It's quite bright and it's really punchy. I quite like that, but I do like this version as well. It's a more subtle olive green. And I do like it as a mixer, especially since they don't have a sap green that I like, so I would use this and then I could tweak it with other colours. And then Green Earth. Again, another notoriously difficult to re-wet pigment in general, not just with Schmincke. It's also a very light pigment, not a lot of tinting strength, which means it's not going to be great in mixes because it'll be easily overpowered. As you can tell, it's barely stained the page at this point. It's so faint. I don't know, some people really love this pigment. Maybe it'd be better straight out the tube, but I definitely... Sorry, so next up we have Jaune Brilliant Dark. Didn't realise where the camera cut off at that point, so apologies for that. Followed by Naples Yellow. And I've really come to enjoy Schmincke's Naples Yellow. I have a tube of it now, and I'm enjoying playing with it and seeing what I can do. Then we have Raw Sienna. Schmincke's not particularly renowned for their earth tones, but they do have some that I really enjoy. Then we have Yellow Raw Ochre. Yeah, it's just their earth tones aren't particularly strong, it seems. They're quite weak, at least the ones these 2 that I've tried now. Then we have Titanium Gold Ochre. This one is apparently opaque. Okay, this one's not too bad. This one's definitely got a bit more punch to it, probably because of that opacity. That's not bad, that's quite nice actually. Then we have Yellow Ochre. This one is semi-opaque. It's definitely got that soft sort of yellow ochre vibe, and it re-wets beautifully. Definitely doesn't have any issues with that. Then we have Transparent Ochre. I'm trying to avoid touching that Jaune Brilliant swatch. Again, this one's not reactivating particularly well. Schmincke usually, their paints from pan or from a palette reactivate beautifully. I've never had any issues with reactivating their paints. It's just some of these dots are not wanting to budge for some reason. Okay, well, that's transparent. Then we have Raw Umber. It's really not a colour I enjoy all too much. I don't really have a need for it. I know people who do lots of landscapes, or I guess more realistic landscapes and like animal portraiture and stuff like that, really love Raw Umber. Not for me. Then we have Naples Yellow Reddish. It's just a slightly more pinker version of Naples Yellow. It's basically Naples Yellow with a bit of red, I guess, mixed in. Then we have Spinel brown, which is an interesting pigment. Can't remember if, I mean, they don't say it's granulating, but I don't know why, but I felt like this was meant to be a granulating colour. I could be wrong. Then we have gold brown. That's a nice colour. We have transparent sienna. Oh, damn it. Then we have maroon brown. This is one, is this the one? No, that's mahogany brown I'm thinking of. Maroon brown, if I can't remember the pigment for this one. Then we have burnt sienna. Can't remember, but I get the feeling just looking at the colour of this one, this is a PR 101 burnt sienna pigment rather than PBR 7. Then we have English Venetian red, which I actually quite like Schmincke's version of this pigment. Followed by madder brown. This is that PR 206 pigment that I really like. It's being discontinued, unfortunately. Not sure how I feel about Schmincke's version. It's not bad. It's just right now it's not reactivating particularly great. Or maybe it's just my dot card's old or something and it's not. There we go, we're getting there. Yeah, that's more the sort of colour I was expecting. It is nice, it's a nice subtle one. Then we have transparent brown. Followed by mahogany brown. This is the one that I was saying. This one is heavily granulating. It's included as an ingredient or as a pigment in a lot of their super granulation colours. It's a stunning one. It's one that I struggled to figure out how to use on its own, but in mixes I do like it. I mean, and by mixes I mean in the super granulation colours that I have it included. I think I only have a half pan of this in my Schmincke palette, which I need to use more often. And then Caput Mortuum, or Caput Mortuum, I'm not sure the correct pronunciation on that one. This one's sort of like a violet hematite type of colour, or violet iron oxide kind of colour. It's a more reddish, purplish leaning brown. Then we have Mars brown, which if I'm not mistaken is PBR 6, and it's also a lovely granulating colour. We have transparent umber. It's not a bad sort of burnt umber type of colour. And then this is burnt umber. Don't know why that's so weak compared to the transparent umber. Yeah, it's just, yeah, I see what people say when they say that Schmincke doesn't have the best, like, earth tones in terms of they don't really pack a punch in that way. Some of them are really nice, others are just a bit lacking. This is green umber, which again feels a lot like that green earth, really not doing much. It's like just barely staining the paper. Then we have Van Dyke Brown. Van Dyke Brown's not a colour I have a lot of experience with in general, even across other brands. I think the only Van Dyke Brown I've ever really used is a Magello. Just not a huge fan of that colour. Then we have Sepia Brown. Then we have Sepia Brown Reddish, which I think I prefer this version. Then we have Neutral Tint, which is a really nice sort of greyish purple colour. Followed by Neutral Grey. I mean, that basically does what it says on the tin. Neutral Grey. Then we have Payne's Grey Bluish, and I definitely prefer this to just general Payne's Grey. I definitely prefer my Payne's Greys to lean blue. Then we have Perylene Green. Last few now. Next up we have their regular Payne's Grey. Which is just not as interesting to me as the bluish version, which is this one here. Then we have Lamp Black. And then Ivory Black. Followed by Hematite Black. Which is more like a soft grey, and it's got some beautiful granulation as well. Then we have Anthracite. Graphite Grey. Last row and a bit. Mars Black. This is PBK 11, otherwise known as Lunar Black or Oxide Black. It's a granulating black pigment. It's used by Rembrandt to create their dusk colours. It's a great sort of mixing black. If I'm going to have a black on my palette, it would be this one. Then we have silver. I'm not sure how well these metallic ones are going to show up. We have gold. And then we have a brilliant opera rose. I'm just going to put a little dot on these last few just so it goes a little bit quicker. Okay, these last four are fluorescent pigments. So brilliant opera rose. So I'm not sure how well these are actually going to show up on screen in terms of their vibrancy. And then we have brilliant purple. And we have brilliant red violet. And finally, brilliant blue violet. Okay, just zoom you guys out a little bit. So these are all the swatches. I'll show them up close so you can take a better look at them. Definitely think it's worth getting a dot card if you are unsure of which colours you would like to get from a particular brand. A lot of watercolour brands will offer dot cards. I think the ones that don't are brands like Sennelier and M. Graham, and basically the brands that use honey in their paints, because it could be quite hard to do a dot card with honey based paints because they stay sticky. But yeah, these are really good, and a lot of these dots have enough pigment on them where you could also swatch on a separate piece of paper. So what I would actually recommend, because this is not the best paper, and had I realized that it wasn't going to work out so well, I would have actually swatched it onto better quality watercolor paper. So that is what I will do with the next one for the super granulating colors, just because I want to give them the best chance at showing off their beautiful colors. But I think as a general overlook, as a first impressions type of thing, this is a great option if you want to get familiar with the colors being offered by a brand, to sort of narrow down your choices before you purchase any tubes, because purchasing tubes or pans even can be quite expensive. It can add up really quickly. But a dot card, I think this one at Jackson's is about, I think it's, oh geez, I don't know when the camera cut me off. What I was saying was, I would recommend purchasing one of these. It's about £18 on Jackson's, I believe. I will have my Jackson's affiliate links down below, which I would really appreciate you guys using if you're planning on purchasing anything. And if it is your first time ordering from Jackson's, you get an extra 10% discount. It doesn't cost you anything extra to use my affiliate links, but it does help me out. But what I was going to say was, if you did want to get it and the price for the dot card is a bit steep for you, you can wait until they're having a Schmincke sale. Jackson's typically has a Schmincke sale or a watercolour sale every so often, several times a year really. And so the dot cards are on sale, both this one and the granulating one. I definitely think it's worth the investment to get an overall look at how the colours work before making a big purchase. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.